Radio Retrofuture.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a new episode of Radio Retrofuture. And today we have as our guest Hanna Agren from Sweden. Hello, Hanna.
Hello.
So, what have you been working on these last few days?
Well, I've been making insects as my plan to take over the world. I have to make a fair few of them. The one I've been working on lately is probably this one.
Ooh, that looks nice.
Yeah, well.
Is it made from actual bugs that you augmented, or?
Yeah, this one is made from a butterfly called Morpho. And usually I will use things like, for example, here is a stag beetle. It's an old one actually, found in an antique shop. I found a whole bunch of them, so I was a bit lucky. So I extended my creepy crawly collection. And beetles are quite nice because then you can buy old ones. These ones are Indonesian, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to butterflies, I get newer ones. So then I usually get them from butterfly farms instead.
Okay.
Because I know that butterfly farms tend to be better for the environment. They tend to, instead of tearing down trees and planting random crops, they will grow new trees and help out the environment.
All right.
So I always try to check out, when you use real live things, you should always check out so that they're not red listed and make sure that you know where they come from.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the main things.
Yeah, I remember those stag beetles. I've been to Indonesia years ago, and I remember we would find like stag beetles that were like I don't know. You had these birds. I don't know what birds they were, but they would like catch these stag beetles and then drill a big hole in them and then eat them up that way. So we would find these complete intact stag beetles with big holes in the back.
That's quite amazing. I could use those.
Yeah. Now they will have a big hole, so in your case that might actually be beneficial, but
No,
yeah.
but that's okay. Mind if they're a bit broken. I had people sending me as like broken beetles from old collections and such. Just because, I mean, I give them new little legs. Like, let's see, I don't know how you can see much you can see on this one. This is another one I've been working on.
Okay.
And this one was lacking, for example, the leg here. Mm-hmm. So I replaced it with all the clock parts.
Yeah.
So there's always new life to get.
Right. Well, what's the weirdest insect people send you?
Well, I managed to skype out of my ex-partner once because it wasn't such a weird thing, but I had this guy who messaged me and said, oh, I have these beetles that are just sort of leftovers from a collection I got. I can't sell them because they're a bit broken. And he had these pictures of beetles that were white and black. And I thought, oh, that's sweet. And he said, oh, I'll send them over like a Christmas gift. And that was really, really, really nice. And what I did not see on the pictures, because there was no size reference, was the fact that they were Goliath beetles. So they were about yay size. And with, you know, the wings out, they were probably about yay size.
Oh, wow.
So they arrived in a little box, and I opened the box, and they weren't in any, like, you know, additional box like they usually are. They were just loose with some paper around it, which caused my poor partner at the time to jump several meters up in the air, I think, and then hyperventilate for about 10 minutes. So that was an interesting occasion, but otherwise, I can see if I can find some funny ones to show you.
Oh, yeah, sure, we have the time.
Oh, I see now. I got a little collection by now.
I can imagine. Is there a name for prepping animals like that? Is it called taxidermy or?
Prepping them like I do, I don't know. That would be, I don't know. I mean, you have entomology when you would prep insects.
Okay.
Plainly, but I don't think they would add clock parts like I do. I usually always use old clock parts from broken down pocket watches and such. And Pia was asking about my creative process, and well, normally what I do is I'll have a beetle, like here's one of the funny ones I was going to show. This is a bamboo beetle, also a very common one down in I'm very shaky. I've been drinking too much coffee today. Bamboo beetle, also a pest over in Asia, and they just look kind of funny. I'll get one, and then usually at 11 o'clock I'll sit down and I'll just pour a whole bunch of pieces out on my table and start trying to piece together what I think would work out. And that's the reason why I went to bed 6 o'clock this morning.
Okay.
So 1 week equals 1 or 2 sleepless nights of about, 6 to 8 hours each.
Right. And how did you get into that? How did you? What was it called again? Entomology?
Yeah, I don't know if I would call this entomology, but entomology is, about insects in general. But
Okay.
Getting into it together with steampunk, I think it had to do with the fact that I was on a steampunk fair. It was the first one that I was on in Alingsås in Sweden about 4 years ago, maybe 5. And I was selling little cogs as a fun thing, just for other people to craft. And I had some extras after the fair was done, and I didn't know what to do with them because they were very small, old pocket watch pieces. And then this is where I should probably say my usual job, my everyday job, is being a Viking. So I was on a stone fair at this occasion, and my neighbor was selling these beautiful butterflies and bugs from Indonesia, I think, as well. I just thought, oh, they're lovely, but I wouldn't know what to do with them. Some cogs started moving in my head, and I realized that I could actually do something nice with this. So I got a whole bunch of them, and then I think it took me about half a year. And then I started putting them together, and now I've done it for about 3 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of fun.
All right.
I enjoy it. It's nice to have something creative to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're still, are you also a reenactor, or is it more a living history part, the Viking stuff?
Well, I'm a reenactor, but I don't get so much, what should you say, when you trade something and you work with it full time, you don't get so much extra time on your spare time for it. So I love the Viking living history and reenactment bit, but on my spare time I do steampunk, basically. But yeah, I have the whole Viking tent, Viking kit, historical clothing, and then I go to both Viking festivals and multi-period events.
All right. So, how did that happen? How did you become professional Viking? Let's start with that.
Oh, this is an even longer time ago. This is 11 years ago. And I got dragged along to some Viking festival. I was supposed to help selling for 1 to 3 weeks, and I ended up being gone for 3 months. At some point during the summer, my phone was in Denmark, my wallet was in Poland, and I was in Bergen in Norway. Yeah, it was a very interesting summer, especially for my friends, because I think they thought I was dead at several points. Had a great time. And during that summer, I met the guy that makes the jewelry that I'm selling now, and we started talking, and now we're working together. So that would be the story of how I became a Viking.
Oh. Is sales, is that in your blood? Is that something you love to do?
Yeah, I think it just kind of happens. I think I like the creative part more than the sales. But the good thing with sales is you meet a lot of people and you get to travel around a lot. And also I get to travel to plan my own schedule, which is sort of fantastic. It means I can do more, like I make steampunk events as well, so it gives me to plan those.
All right. And so how did you get into steampunk?
That was mostly because I really thought Tank Girl was very cool, so I was walking around with goggles. And I really like post-apocalyptic stuff in general. And at some point, people just started saying, "Oh, so you're a steampunk?" And I didn't even know what it was. This is also probably about 10 years ago.
Yeah. A lot of people didn't know what steampunk was. I don't know if you've saw my steampunk beginner's guide, but that's how it usually starts. So, yeah, but go on, tell your story.
No, I think that's, because by then there wasn't any organized steampunk going on here in Sweden. There were the occasional people who liked it, and
Yeah.
maybe occasional, underground events, but nothing big. So this, I think there was some convention before, but this convention I was talking about when I was selling cogs, that was the first organized event that brought enough people together for something to happen. And it sort of sparked the interest. We saw that there was enough people wanting to do something organized. So that's when we started the group we have here in Gothenburg, Steampunk Gothenburg. And it has turned into the biggest steampunk group and the most active steampunk group in Sweden, so that's quite cool. Which doesn't say so much, considering we in Sweden are quite young in this still.
Yeah.
So, the steampunk group in Sweden, let's just say our biggest event is a party and a fair, and we had about 400 people on the fair and 250 on the party. And that's, big as it gets already.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was a volunteer for Emporium Furnesque, which was an event in the Netherlands, and that drew about 200 steampunks. So... Yeah.
So you're similar level anyway.
Sorry?
You're on a similar level over there.
The culture in the Netherlands is rather unique, I start to get the impression. But did steampunk start to explode around 2012 in Sweden as well?
Yeah, around that time.
Yeah.
That's when it really started to go somewhere.
Yeah, for some reason, 2012, that seems to be the big year for steampunk. I need to find out why. But everywhere I'm browsing some political fora at the moment, like places like Stormfront, because I really want to know what those guys are up to. And they all seem to, all their threads about steampunk seem to be 2012. It's really weird. I don't know what that is about, but maybe was that the year the Justin Bieber video came out? Because that's the argument some people make. Yeah, the Justin Bieber video launched it into the mainstream. I don't know if that's true. I need to check that, but
it's possible. I mean, it was a year when a lot of things. I mean, steampunk was really into fashion around 2012, 13, and even 14, depending on which part of fashion it was. So it's really been. It was sort of an explosion then. I think that more people could relate to it and discovered it a bit.
Yeah.
Because I realized steampunk existed the first time I ran into it. I realized that, but I always liked Victorian style. I always liked post-apocalyptic style. And this is sort of both in one. It's amazing. And I don't think I'm the only one that thought that. I think there's a lot of people that have the same idea.
Yeah, well, the Justin Bieber video came out December 2011. So, there was also that Prada steampunk collection. I'm just checking dates here.
And Victoria's Secret had the steampunk wings on one of their catwalks.
Oh, really? I remember something like seeing that. Yeah, and also Prada Goes Steampunk, also 2012. Yeah.
That was the starting year, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, it has existed before.
Oh yeah.
By then we already had all the people who went I've been steampunk for at least 5 years and it's going mainstream now. I don't want to be steampunk anymore.
Yeah. I had a guy on the Anachronistic Society, and he calls himself a former steampunk, and one of the reasons he stopped with steampunk was because it became too unclear what steampunk even was. So I thought it was a really interesting remark.
I can understand it though. We were discussing it a little bit because what I like with the Swedish steampunk community, I should add, is that it's not very judgmental so far. It's quite open and it's in a nice way. I think sometimes online when you see some of the societies that are a bit older, they can be quite harsh on what beginners do. And honestly, we're all beginners from the start. You have to sort of let people get into something. You don't have the skills or money to just buy the best outfit from the start normally. And if you do, then you're lucky.
Yeah.
But I agree on the fact that I think it's good to have certain elements that are a bit like key elements for people to recognize it. Because otherwise it will be anything. I think for me, we had this discussion actually just after the Steampunk ball last weekend. Some of the key elements for me in Steampunk is the technology of the industrialization. So the sort of Victorian technology by looks and the Victorian elements. But it can also, I mean, I don't mind if it's set in a different time, but I think Victorian elements is something that comes through in Steampunk a lot, even if it's set in another time, if you want it to be very typically Steampunk. And also it's the whole joy of new discoveries, both within mechanics, technology, and in the world. You know, exploring. So I think it's a little bit of this, the joy of making things, of seeing things work, of seeing how the world works, of going around the world. A little bit of old technology, a la turn of the century, and a few Victorian elements when it comes to aesthetics. I think that's my view of steampunk.
Yeah, well, I think to add to that is the storytelling part. I think that's also a very essential part, because I'll have my radio channel is gonna get launched soon, Radio Retrofuture Fallout 4, and for those that support me on Patreon, I'll probably launch it end November. All the other people will get it somewhere around the holidays, if they play the game at least. But for those that are interested, yes, you can watch it on YouTube if you're a patron from September. However, I started like comparing to select a lot of steampunk music. And then I got in contact with some goth bands, and I listened to their music. Although steampunk does tend to have a similar sound to things like gothic, punk, and all those other genres. But what sets it apart is the storytelling in the steampunk songs. It's always about a character, it's always about a certain setting, it's always about something of world building. And you don't have that when you listen for goth music. It's about, you know, the person's emotions and how dreadful they feel, or I don't know. And with steampunk, you know, I tried to I was listening to a guy's album, which is a goth band. It just doesn't fit, because the steampunks, you know, they tell these tales of characters and worlds and that kind of thing. And yeah, then you've got this goth band that is singing about, you know, woe is me. You know, it does not work.
Maybe it's something like, you know, the modern day, you know, looking out from a modern day perspective versus looking out from a retrofuturistic perspective. If you want to make it retrofuturistic, you sort of have to add a little bit of setting.
Mm-hmm. Probably, yeah.
Character, because otherwise how would you know that you're not just singing of your everyday life?
Yeah, most certainly.
I guess that's what everyone does. So you get it in Abney Park and the typical ones that you have, Professor Elemental, Steam Powered Giraffe. It's a lot of characters, and it's a lot of different settings they sing about.
Yeah, most of them all have their own unique backstories about fictional characters. But I am actually working on an episode on steampunk music, because, you know, when I announced, like, yeah, we're gonna have a steampunk music station for Fallout, and a lot of people who are Fallout fans but not steampunk fans are like, what the bloody hell is steampunk music? They have no idea. And I think that leads to a lot of the misconceptions about steampunk. To a lot of people, it's only an aesthetic. And then you've got fans with the aesthetic, and they don't realize there is an entire subculture behind it that, you know, creates it. And you mentioned the Victorian aesthetic, and I think why steampunk works so well as a subculture is because we see a lot of steampunks, including myself, that move away from the Victorian aesthetic. More and more, you see a lot more Weird West than we used to, and that's because steampunk also took over Weird West. I predict I'm not sure, but I predict it will take over Dieselpunk. Because the big difference in my mind between the Dieselpunks and the Steampunks is that, like, Steampunks, what I'm stating is they move away from where they started. You know, you cannot look at Steampunk 2012 and Steampunk 2017 and say it's the same thing. You know, there are similarities, but it's not the same thing. And the Dieselpunks, on the other hand, they seem to hammer down on the 1920s. They seem to be moving more and more into the direction of reenactors, and they are far more concerned about their literature. And the Steampunks are more like, okay, how can we develop our community? How do we develop new traditions? It's far more focused on the social aspect. While Dieselpunks like to, you know, talk about philosophy, the Steampunks are like, okay, how can we create the next convention? So that's something I noticed.
The fact that steampunk is a bigger sort of it's you know, you got steampunk which sort of took off and became big, and there's loads and loads of steampunk gatherings and such. At least if you look at in Britain, there's a lot of them, and they're starting to be more and more all over. When it comes to dieselpunk, it's a much smaller sort of world.
Yeah, it is.
That I don't know if it's the same, but if you look, being a Viking reenactor, when you look at Viking reenactment versus medieval reenactment, it's a very interesting difference. And it's the fact that medieval reenactment is very big. It exists everywhere. And it becomes a little bit more commercial, partly. And it also becomes, you know, a lot of more people want to be involved. And we have more archaeological evidence, more sources, more everything from the medieval time than we do from Viking. We know almost exactly how a lot of clothes looked in the medieval time, which we don't very much from Viking and such.
Yeah.
At the same time, medieval markets are much less historically accurate than Viking markets.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because Viking markets is so slim, I think people, you know, sort of zoomed in a little more. And they're more interested in trying, you know, the history when you do Viking. Well, in medieval, you're more interested in the phenomenon of the market, you know, the interesting vibes, having fun, doing things. So maybe it's the same thing. Maybe dieselpunk, it's smaller, and maybe it attracts people that, you know, want to have a little bit.
Yeah, a lot of dieselpunks are also into steampunk and vice versa. But the thing with dieselpunks, what you're doing now, in my estimation, is they're hunkering down on, oh yes, this is dieselpunk. Like they take something that's original 1920s, and they start calling that dieselpunk. They are like the steampunks are starting. You know, there's like medieval steampunk. There is Viking steampunk. There is Golden Age steampunk. There, you know, steampunks are like expanding into new areas because, you know, okay, we've done the Victorians, now it's time to seek greener pastures, and the dieselpunks seem to be bunkering down on what they already got. Like, no, this is our turf.
But maybe you could see dieselpunk a little bit like if you do, say, Viking steampunk. You could call it Viking punk. If you do dieselpunk, that's a little bit like that. So it's already a genre. Maybe that's why. Maybe it's already like it depends on how you want to see it. If steampunk is the entire genre, then maybe dieselpunk is already a small part of it.
Yeah, it will most likely become a subgenre of it. Because when I this is my issue. Like, I was asked to do a Steampunk Beginner's Guide episode on dieselpunk, and my response was, how can I do that? Because if I do that, I'll just make the first 3 episodes again. I'll just replace the word steampunk with dieselpunk.
Yeah, but I think that for me is like when it comes to steampunk, even if I do, because I've been thinking about doing a steampunk Viking outfit for fun, but if I would do steampunk Viking, I would still take Victorian elements and put them in Viking.
Oh yeah, sure, of course. It remains anachronistic, right?
So for me, there is a certain level of what is steampunk, because it's not Victorian in that sense. There is the elements that I was talking about, like for example, steam cogs that we like the sort of clockwork cogs that work mechanically, and well, yeah, coal and electricity, and these things put in, you know, this sort of like slightly mechanical setting with inventions, with new things that you wouldn't really have expected that you put together, like a friend that made a base from some old vase or something made in copper, or a remote control that looks like something completely different, with a few Victorian floral scrolls on the side, so it looks more like, I don't know, something from a completely different time. What I'm trying to do with my bugs, for example, I mean, I didn't make them to be steampunk. I made them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Happened to be steampunk.
Yeah.
But let's say, I don't know which one would be interesting to show and which one you can actually see. But let's say this one, for example. I'd say what makes it steampunk, in a sense, is that I've been trying to make it mechanical, so it looks like it could work. You can wind it up.
Oh yeah, that's the storytelling, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's got little clockwork from an old pocket watch underneath here.
Yeah.
The thing on the top comes, I think it's a 19th century pocket watch, and then I made a little monocle, of course, for fun.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, but that's the thing, right? Like, steampunk is actually filled with, for me, it's history combined with modern pop culture tropes.
Yeah, but if then would have put, say, computer circuits on it, it would have looked cyberpunk.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think that's the immersion part about it, because both cyberpunk and steampunk, I think, like, the storytelling immersion is very important.
Yeah.
Like you said, you know, it must look like it can work. Yeah, like in your cyberpunk example, you couldn't put a historical reference in there.
Yeah, and I think that there is also, it's fun to see, because you had steampunk developing in different ways in different areas. So like, for me, there's a little bit of a sort of American steampunk.
Oh yeah.
Which tends to go more towards, because the British steampunk tends to go more towards, it's supposed to really look like it's working, and if it's working, then we're on, you know, the best level. And I love, you know, that part. I love if you can actually, if you have the skills to build something that actually works properly. I think it's amazing. I wish my bugs could move. I'm hoping that at some point soon I'll be able to make them, you know, do a few things at least.
Interesting.
Yeah, it would be a lot of fun. I just have to sort of, what do you say?
What is your learning process like? How, you know, if somebody asks you, how did you learn all your stuff? What would you tell them?
Buy a lot of broken bugs.
A lot of practice.
Poor bugs. They paid for my.
Okay, but let me rephrase it. How did you acquire new skills?
When it comes to the bugs, I think it's. To be honest, when it comes to the skills, I think I used to do jewelry before I started selling jewelry.
Okay, yeah.
Partly motor skills, because you have to be able to do the little things, and you can learn that in many ways with any sort of tiny work that you do. And then it's patience, a lot of patience, and then it's not giving up when it goes wrong. I think that's how I learned it from the start, because I don't think there is. I think you'll have to try. That's the only way to do something. And just try many times, and try on something that you're not too afraid of losing.
Yeah, good one.
Look at things along the way. Last time was last night. I spent hours on making something, and in the end it turned out I put it in the wrong space, so when I put it all back together, it broke. So I still learn.
Is there any project you're working on you want to promote?
Yeah, well, we're running a lot of shows in Gothenburg that are fun in general. The one that's major at the moment that we're going to be doing is we're doing a whole steampunk weekend. That is the 27th to the 28th of January. And during this weekend, we're both, the association that we do will hold a fair. It's a small steampunk fair, but it's a very nice one with some good quality things in Gothenburg. And after the fair, we have a party which is inside a mountain. It's called Steampunk at the Mountain. And in it we tend to have a lot of interesting things going on in there. The last time we dragged in a cubic meter of sand and made an archaeological pit instead of having a smoking room.
Awesome.
That and
Awesome.
very appreciated. So we tend to try and, you know, make it a little bit extraordinary and interesting. And it's already a little bit interesting because it is a former bomb shelter turned into a party venue. This time we're going to have Monty.
Montague Jacques Fromage the third, yes.
Montague Jacques Fromage the third with Steampunk Funk Bizarre. So he's going to run his tour to the mountain. And then on the Sunday we usually have afternoon tea at the local steampunk bar, which is the first one that opened in the Nordic countries. So it's a lovely one. They have fantastic, crazy, bubbling drinks, and they're just lovely people to go to. And they also usually do a very lovely afternoon tea.
All right.
So it's a week we're coming over for anyway.
Yeah, well, maybe, who knows. I'll have to think about it. Depends, I'll have work or not, I suppose.
I really hope that we can get more associations going here in Sweden, because they're starting to pop up now.
Okay.
We're still wondering what the east coast of Sweden is doing, because the west coast and the south coast has gotten a lot of activity going. So the first thing now was the Steampunk convention this year, and they're going to be running next year as well. So we're waiting for the east coast to catch up now.
All right. So, I'd like to have a closing statement, some words of inspiration. So, do you have some words of inspiration?
I think that the thing that really makes me enjoy steampunk is the creativity and the possibility of exploring it from many different angles. Because since I'm vice president of the association here, I meet a lot of people, and everyone is interested for different reasons, and that's why I love. You will have one person who's really into dressmaking, who makes the most amazing dresses, and another person who's into the literature, who just reads it and who can give you a good tip about a book. Someone who knows mechanics, who's made a hat with an iPhone in it that will show you the weather, and then a third person who is into the music and actually knows steampunk music. And there's so many different aspects that you can be interested in, and get different people together with a certain level of skills that you could never get together otherwise, and who tends to be really happy about sharing and doing things together. So I think it's a really positive community. It's a nice one. It brings back, you know, the positive things from the past. And just a little bit more fun.
All right. There are some other messages from... Let's see. Check out Ave Rose and her automaton. She worked with butterflies.
Oh yeah. I got that tip the other day as well. I think I saw one once which had little hinges that made them move. I thought that was lovely. I'll have to have a look at what I can do to make mine doing interesting as well.
Okay, so that is Ave Rose for people who want to check that out. Okay, Ento Mechanics, I'll put the link down in the description, of course, including with your Viking stuff, I suppose. What's your Viking page called?
Viking Kristall. So basically Viking crystal spelled in Swedish.
All right. Of course, that link will also be down in the description. Radio Retrofuture for the Fallout universe will be released somewhere around the holidays. And for those that want it earlier, I'll release it for patrons on my channel somewhere end November. I have to do that together with Brendan Renning, who runs that project, Old World Radio, for people who are interested in Fallout radio stations. You can also check him out if you're into that kind of stuff. He has a 24/7 radio station on his YouTube channel where he plays all kinds of very diverse music genres with DJs from the Fallout 4 universe. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna leave you alone. And as always, make it your way. Good night.